Segment 1. Arrival at Silver Pines. Sometimes, life closes one door, only to open another, in the quietest places you never expect. Elena Mitchell, 52, pressed her forehead gently against the bus window, watching the Vermont mountains drift past in a morning mist. The city behind her had taken too much: her marriage, her trust, even fragments of her own spirit. Each breath carried the weight of years spent mending a heart that had been broken more than once. Silver Pines promised peace, a retreat from the chaos she had known. Yet, she wasn't sure she still believed in such things. The lodge finally appeared, a rustic building framed by tall pines, stone pathways meandering through flower beds, and the distant glimmer of the lake catching the first rays of sunlight. Eleanor inhaled slowly, the scent of pine, damp earth, and wildflowers filling her senses. It felt almost like stepping into another world, one untouched by pain, one where she might finally breathe again. At the front desk, a man's presence drew her gaze. Daniel Hayes, 55, with streaks of grey in his hair and a calm, reflective demeanour, was checking in. His eyes, thoughtful and soft, met hers for a brief moment. There was a flicker of something unspoken, perhaps recognition of shared experiences, perhaps a silent understanding of what it meant to have a heart that had been hurt. A small, tentative smile passed between them, acknowledging each other's existence without the need for words. Elena's room overlooked the gardens and the lake, sunlight dancing across the water in gold and rose. She unpacked slowly, taking her time with each piece of clothing, each book. She lingered by the window, letting her eyes follow the gentle ripples across the lake. Perhaps here, among the pines and mist, she could find a sense of peace she had long forgotten. Later, wandering the lodge paths, Elena noticed Daniel walking along the stone trails. Their greetings were polite, cautious, but carried a subtle curiosity. He tilted his head slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She returned it, intrigued by the calmness he seemed to carry, a calm that contrasted so sharply with the storm of her own past. Over the next few days, their paths crossed repeatedly. Morning walks along dew-laden paths, sunlight spilling through the trees, birds calling softly in the distance. They shared quiet conversations about books, music, childhood memories, and the small wonders of the natural world. Each exchange, though light, felt meaningful, an unspoken agreement that they could, slowly, start to trust the presence of another human again. Elena noticed the subtle ways Daniel observed the world, the way he paused to watch the sunlight play on the water, the way he noticed the patterns of leaves and shadows, the gentle way he interacted with the small animals they encountered on the trail. She realized that these small attentions were more than quirks. They were glimpses of a kind, patient heart. By the third day, the walls around Elena's heart had begun to loosen. The tension in her chest eased when she saw Daniel waiting for her on the lodge path, a small smile on his face. She began to wonder if it was possible to feel curiosity, and perhaps even hope, at her age. At night, she sat by the window, listening to the gentle rustle of pine needles and the distant trickle of the stream. The air smelled faintly of earth and rain, cool and comforting. She thought of Daniel's quiet presence and felt a flicker of warmth in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, Silver Pines had a way of coaxing hearts to breathe again. Each day brought new moments, Daniel offering a hand to steady her on slippery stones, sharing small stories of his youth, noticing her subtle smiles and thoughtful pauses. Their connection was quiet, deliberate, and full of potential. It wasn't the blazing passion of youth, but the slow, patient recognition of two hearts that had endured loss and were learning to trust life and each other again. Closing line. Segment 1. Two hearts, fragile and cautious, had begun to notice each other, but Silver Pines had only just begun its work. Segment 2. Morning walks and quiet conversations. Silver Pines isn't just a retreat for the body. It's a sanctuary where broken hearts might learn to beat together again. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine, damp earth, and distant wildflowers. Elena stepped onto the garden path, her cardigan wrapped snugly around her shoulders. Dew sparkled like tiny diamonds on the blades of grass, and the soft murmur of the stream nearby set a gentle rhythm to her steps. She wasn't expecting anyone, but Daniel appeared from behind a cluster of tall pines, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, a worn book tucked under his arm. Their eyes met, and a quiet smile passed between them. It was tentative, cautious, yet warm, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared presence. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice carrying the calm patience she had begun to notice. "Good morning," Elena replied, feeling a flutter of something unfamiliar, yet comforting. They walked side by side, letting the quiet of Silver Pines fill the space between them. Each step on the stone path echoed faintly, mingling with the distant calls of birds and the rustle of the pines. The morning was alive with soft sounds, the whisper of wind through leaves, the distant splash of a fish in the lake, the gentle hum of insects awakening to daylight. Elena stole a glance at Daniel. He walked with a relaxed ease, yet his eyes remained attentive, scanning the world around him with quiet curiosity. She realized that his presence wasn't just comforting, it was grounding. He had a way of noticing things she often overlooked. The way sunlight glanced off ripples on the water, the subtle dance of a butterfly over a patch of wildflowers, the symmetry of moss on tree trunks. They began to talk, first lightly, about books they had read, music that lingered in their memories, the little details of life they had long ignored. Conversation grew slowly, naturally, like the sun rising over the hills. Elena found herself sharing small pieces of her past, memories of childhood summers by the river, the scent of her mother's kitchen, the quiet afternoons spent reading under a tree. She didn't dwell on the pain, yet it lingered beneath the words, soft and persistent. Daniel listened without judgment. He shared fragments of his own past, the losses, the regrets, the quiet moments of solitude that had defined his life in recent years. His voice was calm, steady, like the flowing stream beside them. There was a subtle honesty in the way he spoke, a patient willingness to be seen. After a while, they found a bench overlooking the lake. The water reflected the rising sun, ripples spreading in gentle circles. A dragonfly skimmed the surface, and Elena smiled at its delicate grace. Daniel watched her, a soft warmth in his eyes. "I've missed this," Elena admitted quietly, her gaze fixed on the water. "Missed what?" Daniel asked gently. "Being unguarded," she said. "Being able to just exist, without pretending." He nodded, understanding without interruption. "It's hard to find someone to simply exist with," he said. "But here, perhaps, we can." The conversation deepened as they walked further along the trail, past clusters of ferns and wildflowers. They spoke of hopes, longings, and the cautious optimism that came from realizing that the past didn't have to define the future. Each shared story, each pause, each careful glance, built a bridge between them, a bridge that neither had dared to imagine existed. Birdsong rose and fell like a gentle melody. The sunlight filtered through the pines in shifting patterns, casting dappled shadows on their path. Elena noticed how Daniel's hand occasionally brushed against hers as they navigated roots and stones, and the touch, though light, sent warmth through her chest. It was subtle, almost accidental, but it carried meaning. By the end of their morning walk, the weight that had pressed upon Elena's shoulders for so long felt lighter. She had discovered that trust could begin in the quietest moments, in shared silences, in the simple act of walking beside someone who truly noticed her. Closing line. Segment 2. One small gesture, a shared glance, could trust start to grow between two cautious hearts. Segment 3. Unexpected moments. The afternoon sun dangled low over silver pines, casting long, warm strokes of amber across the lake. Elena stood on the boardwalk, her fingers resting lightly on the wooden railing, watching the water shimmer beneath her. The world felt unhurried here. Even the wind moved softly, as though it didn't want to disturb the quiet. She had come here to recover, to stitch herself back together, but she hadn't expected the time to move so gently, or her heart to loosen so slowly. Footsteps sounded behind her, steady and familiar. When she turned, Daniel was there, walking toward her with a calm expression and a small notebook tucked under his arm. "Beautiful spot," he said. "It is," she replied. "Feels like the world is breathing a little slower." He came to stand beside her, leaning one elbow against the railing, his gaze drifting toward the horizon where the sun dipped behind the treetops. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet wasn't awkward, but comforting, like a silence, earned through mutual understanding. Eventually, Daniel tapped the notebook lightly. "I used to write," he said. "Stopped for years. But this place, I don't know. Something about it makes the words return." Elena smiled. "What do you write about?" He hesitated. "Mostly reflections. Moments that meant something but slipped past too quickly." She studied him, his posture, the soft lines around his eyes, the quiet sincerity in the way he spoke. She could see the weight he carried, the invisible ache that accompanied the end of a long marriage. It wasn't loud, but it was present, like a muted echo in the background. "Do you ever feel like life is giving you a chance to breathe again?" he asked suddenly. Elena's breath caught. "Yes," she whispered, "for the first time in a long while." A breeze swept across the lake, ruffling her hair. Daniel reached out instinctively, brushing a strand away from her face. But he stopped halfway, realizing what he was doing. His hand hovered, then retracted. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "It's okay," she said softly. "Really." They walked along the boardwalk, pacing themselves with unhurried steps. Birds skimmed the water's surface, their wings casting brief shadows on the ripples below. Every sound, the splash of a fish, the creak of the wooden planks beneath their feet felt amplified by the stillness around them. They found a bench at the far end of the boardwalk. The wood was warm from the sun. Daniel sat first, leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel crowded. Elena lowered herself beside him, her body relaxing into the rhythm of the surrounding nature. "Do you ever think about starting over?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked out at the water. Starting over felt impossible for a long time. When something breaks inside you, you don't know what pieces to keep and what pieces to let go. Elena nodded slowly. "I know that feeling. Sometimes," Daniel continued, his voice dropping, "we forget that healing isn't supposed to be fast. It's supposed to be honest." Elena's chest tightened, not with pain, but with recognition. A moment later, a sudden gust of wind sent Daniel's notebook slipping off his lap. It tumbled open on the boardwalk, pages fluttering. Before he could react, Elena bent down and caught it. Her fingers brushed his as she handed it back. A small spark, soft, unexpected, passed between them. Daniel swallowed, his voice a little uneven. "Thank you." She held his gaze a little longer than before. The late afternoon light reflected in his eyes made them look warmer, almost golden. A quiet realization passed between them. Something was forming, unspoken but undeniably present. They stayed until the sun dipped lower, turning the lake into a sheet of molten gold. When they finally rose to leave, Daniel walked beside her. Not too close, not too far, just close enough that she could feel the reassurance of his presence. And as they reached the end of the boardwalk, a thought whispered through Elena's mind. Maybe life wasn't giving her only rest, but another chance. Segment 4. Rebuilding Trust. Evening settled quietly over silver pines, painting the sky in gentle shades of lavender and fading rose. Lanterns along the stone paths flickered on, casting soft pools of golden light across the gardens. Elena walked slowly toward the fire pit area, drawn by the scent of burning cedar and the faint crackle of flames. When she arrived, Daniel was already there, sitting alone, firelight reflecting off his face. He looked up as she approached, offering a small, warm smile. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Please," he replied, shifting slightly to make room. The fire pit glowed softly between them, flames bending and swaying like dancers in a quiet ritual. For a moment, they simply watched the embers drift upward, disappearing into the night sky. "There's something comforting about fire," Elena murmured. "It destroys, but it also warms." Daniel considered her words. "Like life," he said. "We burn, and we rebuild." The softness of his voice stirred something inside her. They talked lightly at first about books, their favorite childhood memories, the foods they missed from home. But the longer they sat, the deeper their conversation grew, each question peeling away another layer of guardedness. Daniel's voice shifted, low and honest. "I didn't expect to meet anyone here. I came because I needed to remember who I was without all the weight." Elena nodded slowly. "I came for the same reason. I spent years giving pieces of myself away without realizing how little I had left." The fire hissed softly as a log shifted. Shadows danced along Daniel's features, highlighting the sincerity in his eyes. "What was the hardest part for you?" Elena asked. Daniel exhaled, long and heavy. "Trusting myself again. After everything fell apart, every decision felt dangerous. Every step forward felt like a risk." Elena understood that far too well. She hesitated, then asked, "Do you trust yourself now?" Daniel looked into the fire, then at her. "More than before, but trust comes back slowly, like learning to walk again." A cool breeze passed through the clearing. Elena wrapped her arms around herself instinctively. Without a word, Daniel reached into the woven basket beside the fire pit and handed her a blanket. The gesture was small, but it carried a gentle thoughtfulness she had forgotten existed. "Thank you," she whispered, draping the blanket across her lap. They fell into silence again, but this time it was intimate, not distant, a silence full of shared understanding. After a long moment, Daniel spoke quietly. "Sometimes, I'm afraid of wanting connection again, afraid it will fall apart like before." Elena turned toward him, her voice equally soft. "I'm afraid too, but maybe fear is part of the process." Their eyes met. The fire crackled softly between them, casting shifting amber light across their faces. A group of guests arrived nearby, laughing loudly. Elena felt overwhelmed for a moment. The noise, the crowd, the sudden disruption of their quiet cocoon. She stood quickly. I need some air. Daniel rose immediately, concern in his expression. Elena, are you all right? She nodded, though her breath trembled slightly. Yes, panic comes and goes. Memories too. He hesitated only a second before stepping closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the steady warmth of his presence. You're not alone, he said quietly. Elena's breath steadied. His voice, it anchored her. They walked away from the fire pit, finding a quieter trail that led toward the meadow. The moon, thin and silver, hung low above the treetops. Fireflies flickered in the darkness like wandering stars. As they strolled, Daniel asked, "Who were you before the hurt?" The question stopped her. No one had ever asked it so gently. I was someone who believed in people too easily, she said. Someone who trusted before thinking. Someone who gave without counting the cost. Daniel smiled softly. Those don't sound like flaws. They felt like flaws, she whispered. He shook his head slowly. They sound like someone with a beautiful heart. Someone who loved deeply. Her eyes stung unexpectedly. Who were you? She asked in return. Daniel inhaled. I was a dreamer. I wanted a simple life, full of small joys. I don't think I ever asked too much. I just asked in the wrong places. Their steps slowed until they stood beneath a towering pine, its branches swaying gently above them. Elena, he said, voice low, almost a confession. I'm learning to trust again, because of you. Her breath caught. The honesty in his words settled inside her like a soft flame. Me too, she whispered. I'm learning because of you. A long silence unfolded. Not heavy, not uncertain, just full of possibility. By the time they returned to the lodge, the fire pit embers were fading, and the night had grown still. They parted at the garden path, exchanging a soft goodnight. But neither of them slept quickly that night. Each lay awake, realizing their hearts slowly, cautiously, were rebuilding trust. Segment 5. A New Beginning. Morning broke softly over silver pines. The sky glowed a faint peach color as the first beams of sunlight slipped through the branches, casting long streaks of warm light across the garden. Dew glistened on the petals of wildflowers, and the air smelled fresh, like the promise of something unspoken. Elena woke early, her thoughts drifting back to the night before. Daniel's voice, the quiet honesty in his eyes, the way she'd felt, seen, truly seen. It scared her, but it also softened something inside her that she'd kept locked away for years. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and left her room, letting the cool morning air clear her thoughts. As she stepped into the garden, she noticed Daniel standing near the fountain, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, waiting almost as if he had hoped she would come. When he saw her, his face lit with a gentle smile. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied, unable to keep her own smile from forming. He gestured toward the path. "Walk?" She nodded. They began walking along the lakeside trail, the water shimmering like polished glass. Birds fluttered overhead, greeting the morning with lively chatter. Every sound felt vivid, as though nature itself was awakening with them. As they strolled, Daniel said quietly, "I didn't sleep much." "Neither did I." He stopped, turning toward her. "I kept replaying what you said, about trusting again." Elena swallowed, her heartbeat rising. "I meant it," she whispered. "So did I." They held each other's gaze for a long moment, not speaking, just feeling. Then, slowly, Daniel reached out his hand, not grabbing, not forcing, simply offering. Elena hesitated only a second before placing her hand in his. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like two pieces that had always been meant to fit. The warmth of his palm settled her nerves. Her grip tightened just slightly enough for him to understand. They continued walking hand in hand as the sun rose higher, illuminating the path with golden light. Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years: safety. They paused by a cluster of birch trees, the leaves trembling in the light breeze. Daniel brushed his thumb gently across the back of her hand. "Elena, I don't want to rush anything," he said, "but I also don't want to hide how I feel." She breathed out slowly. "I'm afraid, but not enough to walk away." His eyes softened. "Then let's take it slow, one day at a time." She nodded. One day at a time. They walked further, eventually reaching the meadow, where tall grasses swayed like ocean waves in the wind. A narrow wooden bench sat at the center, weathered yet welcoming. They sat close enough for their shoulders to touch. For a while, they watched butterflies drift lazily between wildflowers. Daniel's voice broke the silence. "Do you think," he said gently, "that we're allowed to start over, even at our age?" Elena smiled softly. "I think starting over doesn't belong to the young. It belongs to the brave." Daniel let out a slow breath, as though her words had lifted something heavy off him. "Then maybe," he said, "we're braver than we think." They talked for hours about where they had been, where they hoped to go, and how unexpectedly healing it felt to confide in someone who listened with genuine care. When they returned to the lodge, the sun was high and warm. Daniel walked her to her door, lingering for a brief moment. "Elena," he said softly, "thank you for trusting me today." She touched his hand gently. "And thank you for making me feel like trust is possible again." Their goodbye was soft, but full of promise. Elena closed the door behind her and leaned against it, heart full in a way she hadn't thought possible. Outside, Daniel walked back toward the path, a quiet smile on his face, one that hadn't touched him in years. Something new had begun. Not rushed, not dramatic, just true. End segment 5. Segment 6. The journey ahead. The final morning of their stay arrived gently, wrapped in a soft blanket of pale gold sunlight. Silver Pines felt especially quiet today, as if the retreat itself understood the significance of this moment. The breeze carried the faint scent of pine and lake water, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Elena stood by her window, watching the early mist drift lazily across the water. Today, she would leave. Daniel would, too. Tomorrow, life outside Silver Pines would return its responsibilities, its uncertainties, its noise. Yet her heart felt strangely calm. She walked to the lakeside path, where Daniel was already waiting. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his jacket, but when he saw her, they fell to his sides open, unguarded. "You came," he said softly. "I knew you'd be here," she replied. They walked slowly along the path, passing the same birch trees, the same wildflowers, the same stones they had stepped over countless times in the past days. But everything felt different now, as if these familiar sights were witnessing the start of something quietly extraordinary. "Leaving feels strange," Elena said, trying to steady her voice. Daniel nodded. "Silver Pines gives you space to breathe. The real world doesn't always make room for that. Do you think what we've found here," she hesitated, "can survive outside this place?" Daniel stopped walking. He turned fully toward her, eyes steady, voice grounded. "Elena, I don't want what we found to stay just here. I want to carry it with us." She felt her throat tighten. I want that too, but the world is bigger than this retreat, and life is complicated. Then we take it slow, he said. One step at a time, like we said. He reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair gently behind her ear. His touch was warm, careful, not claiming, inviting. Elena, meeting you has changed something in me, he confessed. You make the world feel lighter. Tears pricked at her eyes. She didn't look away. You make me feel understood, she whispered. And I didn't think I'd feel that again. He took her hands in his, not with urgency, but with intention. Let's not say goodbye today, Daniel said. Let's call this the beginning. She smiled through her tears. A beginning? They walked until they reached the end of the boardwalk, the same place where their first meaningful conversation had unfolded. The lake glittered beneath the brightening sun, waves rippling gently against the wooden posts. Elena, Daniel said softly. May I? She nodded. He stepped closer and wrapped his arms around her. The embrace was warm, strong, steady, not desperate, reassuring. The kind of embrace that told her she was safe, seen, cherished. When they pulled apart, their foreheads remained close. What happens next? She asked. Daniel smiled gently. We build slowly. We meet again soon. We talk. We visit. We let this grow, naturally. And if fear comes back, she asked, we face it together. She laughed softly. The sound, light, hopeful. I haven't faced anything together with someone in years. You won't be alone anymore, Daniel said. Not if you don't want to be. She looked into his eyes, truly looked, and found no shadows, no grand promises, no unrealistic fantasies. Just honesty, warmth, and room for her heart to heal at its own pace. They walked back to the lodge hand in hand. At the entrance, where their paths would soon diverge, Daniel lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I'll see you soon, he said. Yes, she whispered. You will. And with that, they parted. But not in sadness, in hope. As Elena walked toward the shuttle, she glanced over her shoulder. Daniel remained where she left him, watching her with quiet affection, sunlight warming the edges of his silhouette. Silver pines had given them both more than rest. It had given them a second chance. End segment 6.